In the last video, we talked about how to create and sign in to an IAM user. In this video, we're going to be going into policies in more details. First, I want to talk about policy types, and there are 4 different policy types. The first is identity-based. Identity-based policies are JSON permissions policy documents that you can attach to a principal or identity, such as an IAM user, role, or group. These policies control what actions that identity can perform on which resources and under what conditions. Further, there are 2 types of identity-based policies. There are AWS managed policies and customer managed policies. So we saw examples of AWS managed policies when we assigned administrator privileges to our user. That was an example of a policy that AWS manages and provides for us. There are also customer managed policies, which are policies that you create and manage in your AWS account. And we'll make one of those very shortly here. Moving on for now though, there are also resource-based policies. So resource-based policies are JSON policy documents that you attach to a resource like an Amazon S3 bucket. These policies allow you to specify what actions a specified principal can perform on that resource and under what conditions. Resource-based policies are inline policies, and there are no managed resource-based policies. Remember that adding a principal to a resource-based policy is only half of establishing the trust relationship. You must also use an identity-based policy to grant the principal access to the resource. For a great example of a resource-based policy, feel free to refer back to the Amazon S3 module and the bucket permissions that we work with there. Organization Service Control Policies, or SCPs, are for AWS organizations, which are a service for grouping centrally managed AWS accounts that your business owns. If you enable all features in an organization, then you can apply service control policies to any or all of your accounts. Service control policies are JSON policies that apply a permissions boundary to an AWS organization or organizational unit. This permissions boundary controls the maximum services and actions that can be accessed by entities in those accounts. And finally, there are ACLs, or Access Control Policies. ACLs allow you to control what principals can access a resource. They're similar to resource-based policies, although they're the only policy type that doesn't use the JSON policy document format. Examples of services that use ACLs are S3, Amazon VP, and others. We won't spend a lot of time on ACLs beyond what we configure in our VPC module, but feel free to look at this in your own time. Let's look at a policy in a little bit more detail. You'll notice right off the bat that this policy has multiple permissions applied inside it, and each permission has an SID or statement ID, and that can be anything you'd like. Once again, it also has the effect, which can be allow or deny, the access, or what the principal is going to be allowed to perform, and the resource, or what the principal is going to be allowed to perform the action on. So let's dissect these one by one. In the first one, we have allow IAM change password on everything. And this one's a little misleading because although this means that the principal can use change password on anything, it actually means that the user can only change their own password. So effectively, what this statement is doing is allowing the IAM user to change their own password. The second statement is allowing the action of list all my buckets in S3 on anything, which means any user with this permission is going to be able to list any S3 bucket in their account. And finally, this third statement is just a little bit more complicated than the other 2. So once again, we have the effect of allow, and we have 2 actions, S3 list anything, and S3 get anything. But the resource isn't a wildcard this time. This time we have an ARN for an S3 bucket, and then an ARN for an S3 bucket, but anything inside the bucket. So what this means is that anyone with this permission set is going to be able to list anything or get anything in this particular bucket and its contents. And finally, this permission also has a condition. So the condition is Boolean, multi-factor auth present is true, which means they'll only be able to execute these actions on these resources if they have multi-factor authentication set. Let's take a look at what that would look like in our AWS dashboard. So let's head on over to our AWS dashboard and then find IAM. And what we're going to do this time is create a custom policy. So let's click on Policies on the left side and create policy. Now, when you create a new policy, you do have the option to use a visual editor, but we're going to stick with the JSON here. And we're actually going to use the example that we had in our slide earlier and just copy and paste that in. So once again, we're creating a policy that allows a principal to change their own password, to list any buckets in their account, and then to list or get any S3 resources in these resources as long as they have multi-factor authentication present. So we'll click Review Policy, and we'll give it a name. We'll skip the description for now, and we'll hit Create Policy. There we go. Example policy has been created. So just to really cement this in, let's create a new group with this policy attached. So let's click on Groups on the left side and create New Group. I'm going to name it Example Group and click Next Step. And then you probably know what's going to happen here. I'm going to search for the policy I just created and attach it to this group. Next Step and Create Group. And there we go. These are both of our user-managed groups, including the example group we just created. So if we were to create a new user and attach this user to this group, then that user would have only the permissions that we just set. And that about wraps it up for this video on IAM policies. So if all of that makes sense, then feel free to move on.